You know that moment when your entire world shifts beneath your feet? When everything you thought you knew about the people you love just shatters. I'm 72 years old, and I thought I'd seen it all. I've buried parents, raised 3 children, survived a cancer scare, and weathered more storms than I can count. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened at my brother's wedding last month. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but let me tell you, you're never too old to learn that the people closest to you can be strangers wearing familiar faces. If you love stories of justice, strength, and unexpected twists, subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you never miss another incredible true story. Comment below, where are you watching this from? Drop your city and country. Let's see how far this story reaches. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been married to Richard for 47 years. 47 years of building a life together, of compromises and sacrifices, of holding hands through the hard times and celebrating the good ones. We have 3 beautiful children, 7 grandchildren, and a modest home in suburban Ohio that we've lived in for over 3 decades. Richard retired from his accounting firm 2 years ago, and I thought we were entering that golden phase of life where we'd travel, spend time with the grandkids, maybe take up new hobbies together. I had it all planned out in my head, the way you do when you've been with someone for so long that you think you know exactly how the rest of the story will unfold. My younger brother Tommy, he's 68, and he'd been a bachelor his entire life. We all thought he'd die alone, honestly. He was always the free spirit, the one who traveled the world, who couldn't be tied down. But then he met Diane at a charity gala about 2 years ago, and everything changed. She was 55, elegant, sophisticated, everything Tommy had apparently been waiting for. She had this way about her, this confidence, that made everyone in the room turn and look. Dark hair always perfectly styled, designer clothes that hung on her slim frame like they were made for her specifically, and a smile that could light up a room or cut you down, depending on her mood. I'll be honest, I never quite warmed up to Diane. There was something about her that felt calculated, rehearsed. Every laugh seemed practiced, every gesture deliberate. But Tommy was smitten, absolutely head over heels, and who was I to judge? After decades alone, he deserved happiness, even if I had my private reservations about the woman bringing it to him. Richard, on the other hand, seemed to get along with her just fine. Maybe too fine, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The wedding was planned for October 5th at the Riverside Manor, this beautiful, historic venue about an hour outside of Cleveland. Tommy had spared no expense. There were going to be 200 guests, a live band, an open bar, the works. He wanted to make up for lost time, he said, to celebrate finding love later in life, with all the pomp and circumstance he'd missed by staying single so long. I helped with the planning. Of course, that's what sisters do. I spent months working with the wedding planner, helping choose flowers, tasting cakes, addressing invitations in my careful cursive. I was happy for Tommy, truly happy, even with my reservations about Diane. The week leading up to the wedding, Richard seemed distracted. He'd forget conversations we'd just had, would zone out during dinner, kept checking his phone with this little smile I couldn't quite read. I asked him about it once, and he said he was just stressed about his golf game. Something about a tournament at the club. I believed him, because why wouldn't I? 47 years of marriage doesn't prepare you for suspicion. It builds trust, layer upon layer, until the foundation feels absolutely unshakable. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early, excited, despite my nerves. I had my hair done at 9, came home to do my makeup, and slipped into the navy blue, mother-of-the-bride dress I'd found after weeks of shopping. Well, sister of the groom dress, but you know what I mean. Richard was already dressed when I came downstairs, looking handsome in his charcoal suit. And for a moment, everything felt perfect. He kissed my cheek, told me I looked beautiful, and we drove to the venue together, talking about how surreal it was that baby Tommy was finally getting married. The ceremony was lovely. I'll give Diane that. She'd orchestrated every detail perfectly. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Manor's chapel, casting everything in this warm, golden glow. Tommy cried when Diane walked down the aisle, and even I got a little misty-eyed, watching my little brother finally find his person. The reception was in the grand ballroom, with round tables draped in ivory linens, centerpieces of autumn flowers in deep reds and oranges, and string lights that made the whole room feel magical. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and the champagne flowed freely. I sat at the family table with Richard, watching Kami and Diane have their first dance, and I felt this warmth in my chest, this gratitude that we'd all made it to this moment. Our kids were there with their families, everyone laughing and celebrating, and I thought to myself that this was what life was really about. These moments of connection, of family coming together. After the first dance, Richard excused himself to use the restroom. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? I sipped my champagne, chatted with my daughter Sarah about her youngest starting kindergarten, and kept one eye on the dance floor where Tommy was now dancing with his new mother-in-law. About 15 minutes passed, maybe 20, and Richard still hadn't returned. I figured maybe he'd run into an old friend, gotten caught up in conversation. The venue was large, with multiple bars and seating areas scattered throughout. But then my son Michael came over and asked if I'd seen his father. He needed to ask Richard something about borrowing their truck next weekend. I told him Richard had gone to the restroom a while ago, and Michael offered to go find him. I waved him off, said I'd go myself, that I needed to freshen up anyway. I grabbed my clutch and made my way out of the ballroom, the sounds of music and laughter fading as I walked down the Manor's long corridor. The main restrooms were on the first floor, just past the grand staircase. I checked the men's room entrance, waited a moment, but didn't see Richard emerge. A staff member walked by, and I asked if she'd seen a man matching Richard's description. She said she'd seen someone in a charcoal suit heading toward the library wing about 10 minutes ago. The library wing. That was odd. There was nothing back there except private reading rooms that the venue sometimes used for smaller events or as quiet spaces for guests who needed a break from the festivities. I thanked her and headed in that direction, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floors. The library wing was dimly lit, just wall sconces, casting soft pools of light every few feet. There were 4 or 5 doors along the corridor, all closed except for one at the very end that was slightly ajar. I could see light spilling out into the hallway, and I heard something. Voices. Low. Intimate. I almost turned around right then. I almost walked away and went back to the reception, chalking it up to other guests seeking privacy for their own reasons. But something made me keep walking. Some instinct. Some knowing in my gut that I needed to see what was behind that door. I approached slowly, quietly, and as I got closer, I recognized one of the voices. Richard. My husband of 47 years. And then I heard the other voice, breathy and soft, female. My heart started hammering in my chest, and I felt this cold wave of dread wash over me. I reached the door and peered through the gap, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice in my veins. Richard had Diane pressed against one of the bookshelves, his hands on her waist, her arms wrapped around his neck. They were kissing, deeply, passionately, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Like they were lovers who'd been separated and finally reunited. Diane's perfectly styled hair was slightly mussed. Richard's tie was loosened, and there was an intimacy to the scene that spoke of familiarity, of comfort, of something that had been going on for far longer than a stolen moment at a wedding. I must have made a sound, some small gasp or cry, because they both froze and turned toward the door. Richard's face went pale, absolutely white, and his hands dropped from Diane's waist like he'd been burned. Diane, though, her reaction was different. She looked startled for maybe half a second, but then her expression shifted into something else. Something almost like satisfaction. Like she'd been caught on purpose. Like this was part of some plan I couldn't yet see. I pushed the door open fully and stepped into the room. And I don't know how I was still standing, because my legs felt like they might give out at any moment. My voice, when I found it, didn't sound like my own. It was cold, detached, like it belonged to someone else entirely. "What is this?" I asked, even though the answer was painfully, horrifically obvious. "What the hell is this?" Richard stepped away from Diane, holding his hands up like he was trying to calm a wild animal. "Maggie, I can explain," he started. But what explanation could there possibly be? What words could make sense of what I'd just witnessed? My husband, kissing my brother's bride, on my brother's wedding day, in a private room, while 200 guests celebrated downstairs. "Explain?" I repeated, and I could hear my voice rising, shaking with rage and hurt and disbelief. "You're going to explain why you're kissing Diane? Why you're kissing my brother's wife at his wedding?" The absurdity of it all hit me in waves. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated cruelty. This was a violation of every sacred bond I could think of. Diane smoothed down her dress and fixed her hair with infuriating calmness. "Maggie," she said, and her voice had this condescending tone that made me want to scream. "You were going to find out eventually. Better now than later, don't you think? Better now than later? What kind of psychopath says something like that after being caught with someone else's husband at her own wedding?" I looked at Richard, searching his face for some sign of the man I'd spent nearly 5 decades with. "How long?" I asked. It was the only question that mattered in that moment. How long had this been going on? How long had I been the fool? Richard couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, his jaw working like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. It was Diane who answered, because of course it was. "About 1.5 years, she said, like she was discussing the weather. "We met at that charity gala. The same night Tommy and I met. Richard and I, we just connected." 1.5 years. 18 months of lies. 18 months of Richard coming home to me, kissing me goodnight, making love to me, all while carrying on with this woman. This woman who was about to marry my brother. My mind reeled trying to process it all. "Does Tommy know?" I asked, and my voice cracked on my brother's name. Diane laughed, actually laughed, and it was the cruelest sound I'd ever heard. "Of course Tommy knows," she said. "Did you really think we'd go through with this wedding otherwise?" The room spun. Tommy knew. My baby brother knew that his bride was having an affair with his sister's husband, and he was marrying her anyway. None of this made any sense. I stumbled backward, needing to get out of that room, needing air, needing space to think. Richard reached for me, but I jerked away from his touch like it burned. "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare touch me." I turned and fled, walking as fast as I could back toward the ballroom, my mind racing, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. I burst back into the ballroom, and the cheerful sounds of the celebration felt obscene now. Like a mockery of everything I just discovered. I scanned the crowd frantically, looking for Tommy, and I spotted him near the bar, laughing with some of his old college friends. I marched over to him, not caring who saw the expression on my face, not caring about making a scene. Let them all see. Let everyone know what kind of people they were celebrating. Tommy saw me coming, and his smile faltered. He said something to his friends and they dispersed, leaving us alone at the edge of the dance floor. "Maggie," he said, and there was something in his voice, something knowing that made my stomach turn. "Let's go somewhere quiet to talk." "I don't want to go somewhere quiet," I hissed, keeping my voice low only through sheer force of will. "I want you to tell me what the hell is going on. I just found your wife and my husband in the library, Tommy. In the library, at your wedding, kissing like they've done it 1,000 times before." My voice was shaking now, tears threatening to spill over. But I held them back through sheer stubbornness. Tommy didn't look surprised. He didn't look shocked or hurt or betrayed. He looked calm, almost amused, and that terrified me more than anything else that had happened so far. He glanced around the ballroom, then took my elbow gently. "Come on," he said. "Let's step outside for a minute." I wanted to refuse, wanted to plant my feet and demand answers right there. But the rational part of my brain that still functioned knew that making a bigger scene wouldn't help anything. He led me out through the French doors onto the manor's terrace, where the October evening air was crisp and cool. A few other guests were out there, smoking or getting air, but Tommy guided me to a corner away from everyone else. The sun had fully set now, and the terrace was lit by small lanterns that cast dancing shadows across Tommy's face. "You knew," I said, and it wasn't a question. "Diane said you knew about her and Richard. How could you know and still marry her? How could you do this to me? My brother, my baby brother, who I'd protected and looked after our entire lives, who I'd helped raise after our parents died young, who I'd celebrated and supported through everything. How could he betray me like this?" Tommy leaned against the terrace railing and pulled out a cigarette, something I hadn't seen him do in years. He lit it, took a long drag, and exhaled slowly into the night air. "It's complicated, Maggie," he said finally. "More complicated than you can possibly imagine right now." "Then uncomplicate it," I demanded. "Make me understand how you could possibly justify this." My hands were shaking, and I gripped my clutch so hard, my knuckles went white. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, was crumbling around me, and I needed something solid to hold on to. I needed answers. Tommy studied me for a long moment, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Something hard and calculating that didn't belong in my sweet baby brother's face. "You remember about 5 years ago when Richard's firm was going through that investigation?" he asked. "That whole mess with the SEC?" I nodded slowly, not understanding where this was going. Richard's accounting firm had been investigated for some irregularities in how they'd handled a major client's books. It had been a stressful 6 months, but ultimately, nothing had come of it. The firm had paid a fine, made some internal changes, and moved on. "What does that have to do with anything?" I asked. "Richard didn't tell you the whole truth about that situation," Tommy said, taking another drag of his cigarette. "The investigation found that Richard personally had been cooking the books for multiple clients, helping them hide assets and evade taxes. We're talking serious federal crimes, Maggie, the kind that come with prison time." He let that sink in for a moment, watching my face. "The only reason Richard didn't go to jail is because I helped him." The world tilted again. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "Richard would never." "Why? He's the most honest man I know. He's meticulous about following rules, about doing things by the book." Even as I said it, though, doubt crept in. How well did I really know Richard? I'd just discovered he'd been having an affair for 18 months. What else didn't I know? Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in it. Richard's been running schemes for years, sis. Little ones at first, then bigger as he got more confident. He got greedy, and he got sloppy, and he got caught. When the SEC came knocking, he panicked. He came to me because he knew about my connections. Tommy had always been well-connected through his business ventures and travels. He knew people in high places, people who could make problems disappear if the price was right. I called in every favor I had, Tommy continued. I spent a small fortune on lawyers and bribes and making sure the right people looked the other way. I saved Richard's career, his reputation, and his freedom. And I made sure you never had to know what kind of man you were really married to. He flicked ash from his cigarette over the railing. But favors like that don't come free, Maggie. They come with a price. I felt sick. What price? I asked, though part of me already knew. Part of me understood where this story was heading, and I wanted to unhear it, to turn back time to this morning, when I was still blissfully ignorant. Richard owed me, Tommy said simply. He owed me his life, his freedom, everything. So when I met Diane and we hatched our plan, he didn't really have a choice but to go along with it. He turned to face me fully now, and in the lantern light, he looked like a stranger. Diane and I were partners in more ways than one. We run a very lucrative business together, and this marriage solidifies certain legal protections we need. But Diane has particular tastes, particular needs, and one of those needs is Richard. I stumbled backward, catching myself on a planter. You're telling me that you forced Richard into an affair with your wife as payment for keeping him out of prison? The words sounded insane coming out of my mouth. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare. Forced is such an ugly word, Tommy said. Richard was more than willing once Diane turned her attention to him. Turns out, your devoted husband has quite the appetite for excitement, for danger. All those years of playing it safe with you, being the responsible husband and father, he jumped at the chance to walk on the wild side. Each word was a knife twisting in my chest. I couldn't breathe. The terrace, the manor, everything felt like it was closing in on me. Why are you telling me this? I gasped. Why now? Why not just keep lying to me forever? Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't bother trying to stop them. My marriage was a lie. My brother was a monster. Everything I'd built my life on was sand. Tommy crushed out his cigarette and looked at me with something that might have been pity if it weren't so cold. Because you were going to find out eventually, just like Diane said, and because I need you to understand something very important, Maggie. He stepped closer, and I pressed myself against the railing, away from him. You're not going to say anything about this to anyone. You're not going to make a scene. You're not going to file for divorce. You're not going to run to the police or a lawyer or anyone else. You're going to go back inside, smile for the cameras, and pretend like everything is fine. And why would I do that? I asked, anger finally breaking through the shock and grief. Why would I protect you or Richard or that woman after what you've done to me? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab one of those lanterns and smash it. I wanted to burn this whole beautiful manor to the ground with everyone in it. Tommy's expression hardened. Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what Richard did. Every detail of his crimes, every client he defrauded, every law he broke. I kept the evidence, Maggie. I have copies of everything. And it's not just Richard who'll go down. The statute of limitations hasn't run out. He'll go to prison, and you'll lose everything. The house, the retirement accounts, all of it. will be seized. Your kids, you have to watch their father do a perp walk on the evening news. Your grandchildren will grow up knowing their grandfather is a criminal. I felt the blood drain from my face. You'd do that to your own family? To your nieces and nephews? This couldn't be the little boy I'd tucked into bed, who I'd helped with homework, who'd cried in my arms when our mother died. I'd do whatever necessary to protect my interests, Tommy said matter-of-factly. And right now, my interests require that you play along. Think of it as a business arrangement. You keep quiet, maintain appearances, and everyone gets to keep living their comfortable lives. Make waves, and everyone drowns. He straightened his tie and buttoned his jacket. Now, I need to get back to my wedding. My guests will be wondering where the groom is. He started to walk past me, but I grabbed his arm. Tommy, please, I said. And I hated how broken my voice sounded. Please don't do this. We're family. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? I was begging now, pleading with whatever small piece of my brother might still exist inside this stranger. He looked down at where my hand clutched his sleeve, then back up at my face. For just a second, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, some shadow of the boy he used to be, some hint of conscience or regret. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold calculation. Family, he said softly, is just another word for people who have leverage over you. I learned that a long time ago, Maggie. You should learn it too. He pulled his arm free and walked back into the ballroom, leaving me standing alone on the terrace with my entire world in ruins. I don't know how long I stood there, shivering in the October cold, trying to process everything I'd learned. My husband was a criminal and an adulterer. My brother was a blackmailer and a manipulator. And I was trapped, completely and utterly trapped, with no way out that didn't destroy everything and everyone I loved. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I went to the restroom, washed my face, fixed my makeup as best I could. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older somehow, like she'd aged a decade in the span of an hour. Her eyes were haunted, empty. I practiced smiling, tried to make it reach my eyes, failed miserably, but decided it would have to do. When I walked back into the ballroom, the party was in full swing. The band was playing something upbeat, couples were dancing, and laughter echoed off the high ceilings. I spotted Richard immediately. He was standing near our table, looking like a man facing execution. When he saw me, he started to approach, but I held up a hand to stop him. I couldn't talk to him right now. If I tried, I'd either scream or break down completely, and I couldn't afford either option. I made my way to the bar and ordered a double scotch, neat. The bartender raised an eyebrow, but poured it without comment. I downed it in 2 swallows, feeling the burn all the way down, and ordered another. I needed something to numb the pain, to create some distance between me and the nightmare my life had become. As I waited for my second drink, I felt a presence beside me. I turned, half expecting Richard or Tommy, but it was Diane. She looked perfect, not a hair out of place, her makeup flawless, her wedding dress pristine. She smiled at me, and it was the smile of a predator who'd just cornered her prey. "Having fun, Maggie?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I wanted to throw my drink in her face. I wanted to grab her by her perfectly styled hair and drag her out of this ballroom and tell everyone what kind of woman she really was. Instead, I took my second scotch from the bartender and drank half of it before answering. "What do you want, Diane?" "I just wanted to make sure we understand each other," she said, still smiling that terrible smile. Tommy told you how things are going to be, and I wanted to reinforce the message. You see, I don't particularly care whether you're happy or sad, comfortable or miserable. All I care about is that you keep your mouth shut and stay out of our way." She leaned in closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume. "Richard is mine now. He has been for a while. You're just the obligation he comes home to, the habit he can't quite break. But I'm the one he thinks about, the one he wants, and there's nothing you can do about it." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the scotch. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of this woman. Or maybe it was just that I'd reached my limit of humiliation for one day. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You know what, Diane? You can have him. You're welcome to my cheating criminal husband. I hope you two are very happy together. You deserve each other." Her smile faltered for just a second, like my response wasn't what she'd expected. She'd wanted me broken, defeated, and while I certainly felt those things, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing it. I finished my drink, set the glass down on the bar with a sharp click, and walked away from her without another word. I spent the rest of the reception in a kind of fog, going through the motions like an automaton. I danced with my son when he asked, smiled for the photographer, made small talk with relatives I hadn't seen in years. On the outside, I looked like any other mother of the groom enjoying her brother's wedding. On the inside, I was screaming. When Tommy and Diane cut the cake, I applauded with everyone else. When they had their last dance and prepared to leave for their honeymoon, I threw rose petals with the other guests. And when Tommy caught my eye across the crowd and winked at me, saying with that simple gesture what he'd said on the terrace, that this was just the beginning, that I was trapped in their game now, I smiled back at him. I smiled like my heart wasn't shattered into a million pieces. Richard and I drove home in silence. He tried several times to start a conversation, to explain or apologize or whatever he thought might make this better. But I cut him off every time. I had nothing to say to him. Not yet. Not until I'd figured out what I was going to do. Because despite everything Tommy had said, despite his threats and Diane's cruelty, I wasn't sure I could just accept this new reality. I wasn't sure I could live the rest of my life in this gilded cage they'd built for me. When we got home, Richard went straight to the guest bedroom without me having to tell him. Good. I couldn't bear the thought of him in our bed, in the space we'd shared for decades. I went to our room, my room now, I supposed, and sat on the edge of the mattress, still in my navy dress, and let myself finally, truly break down. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the brother I'd lost, for the future I'd imagined that would never be. I cried until there were no tears left, until I was empty and exhausted and numb. Over the following days and weeks, I did a lot of thinking. I researched lawyers, investigated my options, tried to find a way out of the trap Tommy had set. But every avenue I explored led to the same conclusion. He hadn't been bluffing. Richard had committed serious crimes, and Tommy had the evidence to prove it. If I pushed this, if I went public, or filed for divorce, or did anything to upset their arrangement, my entire family would be destroyed. My children would suffer. My grandchildren would grow up in the shadow of scandal and shame. The financial devastation alone would be catastrophic. But I also realized something else during those long, sleepless nights. Tommy had made a mistake. He'd underestimated me. He'd assumed that threatening my family would be enough to keep me in line forever, that I'd be too afraid or too weak to fight back. What he didn't understand was that I wasn't the same woman I'd been on his wedding day. That woman had died in the library wing of Riverside Manor. The woman who'd emerged from those ashes was harder, colder, and far more dangerous than Tommy could possibly imagine. I started gathering my own evidence. I became a detective in my own home, documenting Richard's affair with meticulous detail. I installed spyware on his phone, recorded his conversations, photographed messages and emails. I hired a private investigator to follow Diane and Tommy, to dig into their business dealings, to find the skeletons I knew had to be hiding in their closets. If they wanted to play games, I'd play games, but I'd play to win. I also started preparing for the long game. I opened new bank accounts Richard didn't know about. I moved money slowly, carefully, creating a safety net he couldn't touch. I made copies of every important document we had, deeds, titles, account statements, everything. I consulted with lawyers in other states, using fake names, learning about asset protection and legal strategies. I was building my escape route, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. And most importantly, I started reaching out to Richard's former clients, the ones Tommy had helped him defraud. I did it carefully, anonymously at first, just dropping hints that they might want to review their old accounts, suggesting they might have been victims of financial crimes. I planted seeds that would take time to grow, but when they finally bloomed, the harvest would be devastating. Tommy thought he had all the leverage, but he'd forgotten something crucial. The evidence that could destroy Richard could also destroy Tommy. After all, helping someone commit fraud and then covering it up makes you an accessory after the fact. Tommy had saved Richard, but in doing so, he'd made himself vulnerable too. I'm still living with Richard. To the outside world, we're the same comfortable old couple we've always been. We have dinner with the kids, babysit the grandchildren, attend church on Sundays. Richard thinks I've accepted the situation, that Tommy's threats worked. He's grown comfortable again, careless. He still sees Diane regularly. They don't even try very hard to hide it anymore. And he comes home to me like nothing's wrong. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with something like pity. Like he feels sorry for the pathetic old woman who's too weak to leave. Let him think that. Let them all think that. What they don't know is that I'm not weak. I'm patient. I'm strategic. And I'm playing a longer game than any of them can see. The private investigator I hired has uncovered some very interesting information about Tommy and Diane's business dealings. It turns out they're involved in some ventures that wouldn't stand up well to scrutiny from the IRS or the FBI. Tax evasion, money laundering, fraud, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, apparently. I had a documentation of everything, stored safely in multiple locations they'll never find. I've also been quietly building relationships with Richard's former clients, the ones who were victimized by his schemes. I've been sharing information, helping them understand what was done to them, encouraging them to seek legal counsel. A class action lawsuit is forming, slowly but surely. When it hits, it's going to be explosive. And while Tommy thinks he has evidence that would send Richard to prison, he doesn't know that I have evidence that would send them both to prison. The student has become the master. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I should just leave, take what I can and start over, forget about revenge. And maybe you're right. Maybe the healthy thing would be to walk away, to let them destroy themselves, eventually without my help. But here's what I've learned over these past 6 months. Sometimes the people who hurt you don't get what they deserve unless you make sure they do. Sometimes justice doesn't just happen. Sometimes you have to architect it, brick by careful brick. So I wait, I watch, I gather my evidence and build my case. I smile at Richard over breakfast and ask about his day. I send birthday cards to Tommy and Diane. I play the role they've assigned me perfectly. And while I play it, I'm preparing for the final act. The one where the curtain falls and everyone finally sees what's been happening behind the scenes. Tommy thought the show was just getting started that night at his wedding. He had no idea how right he was. But what he doesn't understand, What none of them understand is that I'm not a spectator in this show. I'm the director, and I've already written the ending. They're going to learn that you don't betray a woman who spent 72 years surviving, adapting, and overcoming. You don't trap someone who's already lived through hell and come out the other side. And you definitely don't underestimate a grandmother who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The show is just getting started, indeed. But when it ends, I'll be the only one still standing. That's a promise I've made to myself. And it's one I intend to keep. Because 47 years of marriage taught me a lot of things, but the most important lesson came in the last 6 months. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't hot and immediate. Sometimes, it's cold, patient, and absolutely devastating. And I've become very good at waiting. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected justice, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of strength, resilience, and karma. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from? What country? What city? Let's connect this community from all around the world. And tell us, have you ever been underestimated? Share your story in the comments.